Good afternoon, and welcome to this week's installment of the CU Senior Seminar Political Science discussion of current topics and events. My name is Sean Williams, and I am the instructor slash moderator for the CU Seminar class. Today, our group of panelists from my left to my right, as they appear on my screen, are Cadet Adele, Lucas Costa, Lucas Pennington, and Sarah Farrell. How are you guys doing today?
Good.
All right.
Good, very well.
Pretty fantastic. So what we're going to do is kind of the format we've been using for the last couple of weeks. Is I'm going to start off the conversation with the first question or two, and then I'm going to kind of take a step back and turn off my mic and my camera, and then let the panelists just take control over the conversation. And then as we get towards the end, I'll jump in maybe with a few additional questions or some final thoughts. So the topic of conversation this week is on police militarization, and the causes or effects of having an increasingly militarized police force in the United States. So I guess the first question, for people who may not be familiar with it back home, what exactly are we talking about when we talk about police militarization?
I think overall or in general, police militarization is when you see a police force in a community, like a local level police force, and they use military tactics or weapons or create sort of a military appearance within that community, rather than just what you're used to seeing as a police force in a community.
Yeah, basically it's also like where they're like giving like military weapons and equipment to the police forces to help them carry out their day-to-day operations, and so it's basically like giving them more technology and more ability to go out there and defend their community in a sense, even though it might be more extreme than what's necessary.
And one thing I found interesting, because it was a student's paper for his master's program, is he talked about militarism, and that militarization is the implementation of the ideology of militarism, which is it stresses the use of force and threat of violence as the most appropriate and effective means to solve problems.
There's a lot of the idea of bringing war home, and that's most of the idea behind of the police militarization, especially throughout the American territory, which basically exemplifies the idea of bringing to the police force or reinforce military equipment or apparel and upgrading to another level and statuses where they could be equal or at least at the same level of military forces.
Yeah, and you've always had an idea of a more intense unit of police units themselves. You've got the SWAT team, and they're designated and delegated to handle high-risk situations, hostage situations, bank robberies, somewhere where there's an active shooter, but that's designated for those specific purposes. And now you've seen an increase of that type of mindset, or even that type of apparel, like you said, coming full circle. Like the entire police force is representing this military mindset and this military look, and now operating like a military or like soldiers.
Yeah, especially in like areas like smaller communities and stuff, they're even taking on that mindset. Even though that they may have smaller police departments and stuff, they're still getting the funding and stuff to make themselves look more militaristic compared in the eyes of the community, which, I mean, some people have their opinion about, which I guess we'll get into later.
Yeah, so basically what we're discussing now is what are the consequences or benefits that by creating and moving away from having responsibilities specifically to the army or army forces and bringing that duties to lower level police forces, and what are the effects and counter effects to the society as you improve police forces with army equipment.
And I think to talk about that, we have to talk about this shift. When did this happen, and how did it happen? I think introduced, or how they got this equipment was a piece of legislation that was introduced called the 1033 program, which took the old equipment from the military that they weren't using anymore, tanks and stuff that were $500,000. Instead of selling them or throwing them away, they recycled them, sent them to police forces. And so now you've got, like Lucas said, you've got lower level police forces in small communities now have access to these huge machine guns, and they have tanks, and they've got Kevlar helmets and riot gear. And that's something that before this program you didn't see, but now that these equipment is allocated to smaller police forces, you're seeing an incline in a militaristic mindset and militaristic actions taken by police who maybe don't have training to do these things or use this equipment.
And not to really take a step back, but also before, like, when 1033 first started, it was a lot of the military equipment, it was going to like border towns, especially Texas and stuff like that, so they could protect our border. But now you're getting it more into the small towns, and so it is building that militarization up that we're seeing a lot today, especially in like Ferguson, which a lot of articles you can find, that's what it talks about.
Yeah, definitely, and like it goes back to what Lucas was saying about like some of the benefits and costs and stuff like that all this has on it. And I feel like Kadada hit on a really good point, the training. Like the lower levels aren't getting the training necessary to be able to operate this equipment and weapons and stuff that they're getting into. And I feel like as a cost, that's definitely going to be a big cost, because if you're going to give these weapons and this material and stuff to these lower levels, you're going to have to pay for them to be trained to learn how to use it and stuff. And is it really necessary in communities that are smaller, such as like little towns like Campbellsville, for a fact?
I mean, I was just researching some of these places that received funding from the 1033 program. A place like Doryville, Georgia, a population of 8,000 people, and they have a tank. What in the world are you going to do with a tank in a town with 8,000 people? Like, first of all, you're tearing up the roads with a piece of equipment that size that's not built to run on city infrastructure, and you're creating this presence. Like, there's 8,000 people, and you're driving through the middle of town with a tank. What type of presence are you setting? In that community, they're not viewing you now as Andy Griffith. They're looking at you now as you're patrolling my streets. There's a war going on. And I think that does not do any justice for police and community reconciliation after events that have happened like Ferguson and uprisings and police brutality like that. You're not helping the way that the community views police and their job.
And that brings up a whole nother topic, which is the interference of civil liberties. You've mentioned, Kirara, before that there was a reason in the past why they have implemented such pieces of legislation. And what we're discussing now by referring to Ferguson is that the reasons why they have implemented that in the past have somehow and somewhat changed throughout time. And now what we're seeing is a misplaced use of militarized forces and equipment in the present, way different from the past, where you said, for example, border protection, or when you see the whole terrorist influences in effect in society. And now, okay, where am I applying, in a practical sense, a tank in a small city environment? Has the reasons why they've done such thing change over the course of history? And what we're seeing now is that yes, it has changed.
Yeah, definitely. Everyone's getting this mindset. Like, I know I was talking to some people of the KSP, and they were saying that it's their duty to go home at night, and they're literally taking that more serious now than they ever have. So that's why they're trying to implement these new strategies, such as using military weapons and equipment. So they're gonna do whatever necessary to make it home at night. And I just don't know if it comes down to having to implement military weapons and stuff, because I feel like that's a little extreme, especially in smaller towns.
So, Lucas, we're going to keep going with that. Do you think that it's more for the police protection that they're using the military grade equipment, or do you think it's more for the community protection?
I feel like
I think what Lucas hit on, as far as what these police are being taught and what's going on in their training, you've got a shift over time. Whereas if you if you see research done and they ask older police officers, what do they think about this new type of police force that we see today with the militarized weaponry and mindset, and they're not as big of a fan of it as these younger guys who are coming into the police force. I mean, you've got police training videos that show tanks sweeping around, and you show big bulky guys in vests with guns having raids into people's homes, and they're tackling people to the ground, and it's creating this mentality that as a police officer coming into this force, no longer am I a community resident who comes and tries to bring peace and justice to a city. Now I'm a soldier. A soldier's job is to annihilate the enemy. You've got a police, they're there to protect the citizens of the community in which they serve. And I think you see this increase with this weaponry. It doesn't help, but I think there's a deeper problem with the training of the police. They're taught, you got to make it home at night. The threats facing you are a lot more dangerous than what they used to be, when really we see a decrease in crime in America, and yet you see an increase in police, I guess, control. And so I would just wonder what you guys think about the correlation between the police being present in the community and violence lacking. Is there any direct correlation to that as far as how society's changed over time to make that happen?
Definitely, I think there is a correlation. Go ahead.
No?
I was just going to say that I think there is a correlation because, I feel like nowadays the police are becoming more feared. People in the society are beginning to respect them more because they're beginning to gain more authority and more power than what they have had before. So therefore, if police are present in the community, people are taking them serious, and they're more likely to think about what they're going to do if they're going to commit a crime before they do it. So they're second guessing themselves, and most people that second guess themselves, they get that little conscious feeling in their stomach that they don't want to commit the crime because they know it's wrong. And I feel like police presence is definitely necessary to make a society safer.
But there is another important point that we have to hit on, is that a lot has changed in terms of social aspects and the minorities within society. There is this sense of fixing social dysregulations or disruptions, where you would see police being that person that would go and try to solve social instabilities. And now, as you see society, the American society, moving towards a more equal and more social society, you see a loss of focus, and then for that, the police force trying to find another placement in their function, or finding new functions for them.
Yeah, and I think as Lucas Pennington hit on, you said there's this rise rather in respect coming from the community to the police officer. I'm second guessing myself. Do I really want to commit this crime? But that, to me, comes out of a sense of fear. If I see somebody rolling through my streets and they don't have on the typical police uniform, but rather they have on, what you would see if somebody was fighting a war abroad, and they've got huge guns instead of just a typical gun on their waist, and they've got riot shields and Kevlar helmets, and they're driving through with tanks, and they've got flash grenades. To me, that's instilling fear. I don't respect you more because of the position you hold. I fear you because now a petty crime that I may have committed may cost me my life. I mean, drug dealers don't get into dealing drugs to kill police. They get into it to make money. And you've got SWAT teams coming in with military force to serve a drug warrant. And I mean, it just doesn't seem like there's any conscious effort to say, okay, do we really need a SWAT team to come serve a petty warrant over narcotics? Or can we go back to the old way of, hey, knock on your door, here's your warrant,
And that's one of the reasons why I think there is this mentality shift over time. That in the past, people would support police militarization for specific reasons. They were seeing their democratic and liberties being threatened by outside forces. And now what you see is a sense of community being more active in self-defense and self-protection, where they would try to establish their own rules and try to establish their own means to self-protect from any disruptions. And now you'll see two distinguished groups where one would support this police militarization to try to reinforce this protection, and the other one that, okay, we don't really need you. It's more of a threat to our civil
Right.
liberties to have tanks walking in our town rather than us um, creating this policy.
Most definitely, I would agree with you and Kadada both, and especially I want to go to Kadada about the fact that the fear. I feel like it is a fear tactic, like especially in smaller towns. Like I feel like in some cities, such as maybe Chicago and New York and Los Angeles, like some bigger cities, like the police militarization is like necessary because there's drug problems and there's violence problems that are beyond the capabilities of the police departments to take care of. And if we're going to cut back on that crime, I feel like maybe we are on to something with the whole militarization of the police departments. But in smaller towns, I definitely think it's definitely causing a sense of fear in the people, and maybe it does take away from some of their respect. But in bigger cities, I'm all for it.
And that's the thing.
I almost have to.
In big
Go
cities, you
ahead.
would see a efficient and more rapid response from army forces. The whole idea of police militarization is that you're placing gears and machine guns in police officers' hands. And do you really think that the population in bigger cities would support the idea of having police forces carrying out heavy machine guns in the streets? Because then you would refer to the whole Ferguson example where riots would just come right after the whole event.
Right. I have to disagree that excessive force is necessary even in the bigger cities because it all comes back to a mentality. You can take away the guns and you can take away the tanks and you can take away the armor, but at the end of the day, they've declared it a war on drugs. And so you're shifting this mentality of what we as Americans typically perceive as war, violence and bloodshed, annihilate the enemy, get rid of the other. And so now we don't see people who have a problem with drugs and are breaking the law as someone who needs help and they need to be contained and then they need to be dealt with in a court of law. Now we're coming in with our rifles up. We've got 25 guys to come pull out one guy that we suspect selling drugs. Even in a bigger city where it's more prevalent, I don't think that that type of force or presence is necessary because you create a really bad aura in the community. You're not seeing the citizens that you serve alongside of as people. Now you're seeing them as the other. You're seeing them as the enemy. And I think that has to come down to training and just to the presence overall in the community that the police set forth, when they say, okay, this is our goal, this is our mission as police, this is the job I signed up for. I don't think that you sign up to be a cop to go in and fight a war as if you're fighting a physical war.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying also. The only thing about that is like you use the Ferguson issue, and I think all of us here can agree that there was discrepancies in that situation, that the police did not act the way that they should, and they probably were not trained to deal with the situations the proper way and stuff like that. So I feel like with the proper training, maybe if they had the proper training and we saw it carried out the proper way, maybe people would change their opinion and viewpoint about it.
Right.
But what
But I
we're
don't think that you
referring to
can.
is not it's not a problem in the end of the police force's end. It's more of the society's end. Like that mentality won't. I don't think it would change even with proper training. They would see or qualify police officers to empower such changes to them.
Yeah, I think it's systematic. I don't think that inevitably all of the blame is shifted onto the shoulders of the police, but I think it's the way that society is geared and the way that society has kind of interweaved itself in this mentality that there's an us and there's a them. And if you're with us, if you're not with us, you're against us. And so as a cop, when we were growing up, little kids would say, I want to be a cop. And you would ask them why. And they would say something like, I want to help be a positive presence in my community, help get cats out of trees and help take down the bad guys. But now you're seeing an increase of people becoming cops And yeah, they want to take down the bad guys, but they want all the big equipment to do it, and they want this thrill. You know, it's more of a thrill-seeking opportunity in a career than it is, I want to be a positive force in my community.
So I know a lot of it is, so we do have our National Guard, and so like, do you think we need to go back to where if there are those big problems, instead of having the police be militarized, call in our National Guard, so then they have the training that we've been talking about that sometimes we think that our police need is their own useless equipment. So
I
what
think
do you
I think we have a version of that already. We brought up the SWAT team, who are specially trained and they're specially designed and organized to deal with these type of issues that we're talking about. We've had instances in the past before, where the military was brought in to be a police force, and so we no longer have that. I think under natural disasters, when you need more hands and more feet on the ground to fix a problem that's present, sure. But if you're trying to bring in the military to deal with domestic issues in our communities, I think it would be effective if the police weren't so already militarized. You've got, I would be interested to see the numbers, but you've probably got a large amount of people in our society who have a negative view of cops. Not all cops are bad. I think we could all agree on that. But because of what's publicized in the media and because of what the police is now kind of becoming, because it is more of a protect me over protect you type of mentality, it's not as effective, and it wouldn't be as effective to bring in, say, the National Guard for a domestic issue.
And I mean, if we go back in the past, what you would see is the SWAT team being already what it is, and now declaring war on drugs, for example. That's what they have declared in the present. And do we really need SWAT teams? They are prepared and they know how to handle situations, changing their focus and their attention to minor or social aspects of, for example, drugs, the fight on drugs. I don't really think that even restricting the militarization would benefit society in that sense.
And just to touch on what you were talking about for the SWAT team, that they've declared this war on drugs, and so you've got where you would have your sheriff deliver a warrant. Now you've got a SWAT team, 25 people coming in with all this equipment just to serve a search warrant. They're kicking down doors, busting down windows in the middle of the night where people are sleeping, throwing in, like flash grenades. And so you already have a disproportionate view of what the SWAT team's there for. And just a couple of facts I got from the ACLU. They did a year-long study, police militarization in the U.S. in 2014, and they found that 800 deployments of the SWAT team were among 20 local, state, and federal police agencies in 2011 and 2012. 62% of those were conducted for drugs, around 80% were just to serve a search warrant, and around 36% of those found no contraband. And I think that just speaks to the disproportion of what is the SWAT team there for, you know?
And if you want to see the practical example, other examples outside the United States to exemplify what a mess and what chaos could that propitiate, would you just have to take a look at recent protests throughout the Latin American countries. For instance, back in 2003, 2004, social protests in Brazil, where you would see Rio de Janeiro, like a really big city, you would see highly armored police forces walking down slums and not being able to differentiate the criminals from the ordinary people. And they would just come in highly empowered with high equipment, not being able to distinguish, making their own decisions, and literally creating chaos as they would try to fight a war on drugs and the cartels and stuff. And it was just way too problematic. Problematic.
Yeah, I would agree with you there. And like as we're sitting here talking about it, one thing that comes to mind is like one of the groups that I feel like may feel disrespected. Like I feel like respect is a big thing, and one group that I feel like might be disrespected and feel disrespected and be least supportive of this movement is the military itself, because I mean they're out there, they're trained personnel, they're supposed to go into other countries, they're supposed to defend our freedoms and our rights, and now we have these people giving military weapons to these police officers, and basically they're like making that distinction between a police officer and a soldier very little. And I feel like as a military person, if I would be very disrespected, because that's my job, that's my livelihood. I'm here to protect you, and now you're just basically disrespecting me and giving police officers the same like authority that I should have.
Yeah, I mean, I 100% agree with that. And what it makes me think of is when Ferguson was happening, there's a report on CNN where they actually had a serviceman who they were interviewing, and it showed a picture of the police with their rifles pointed at a guy, and his hands were up, as in, I don't have anything, I'm innocent. And the soldier was saying, we're taught that you only aim at something with the intention to shoot. Your finger's on the trigger and your intention is to kill the object at which your gun is pointed. And you've got 10, 12 police here, all of them aiming their gun at one guy, and they've been given military equipment, they're using military tactics, but they haven't been given military training. And so, yeah, that's completely disrespectful to our military, who are trained thoroughly to deal with situations that actually call for this type of, use of force and presence.
And we deserve to give our military the utmost respect, because I mean they have been like around the world, we're known to have a military that is highly trained and highly respected in the international world. And I feel like this is one thing that I feel very strongly about. I feel like giving police military weapons and stuff to other people is a bad idea, in the fact that it's
I'm not sure I'm hearing Lucas. I think you're cutting out, but um,
And that hits on another um, not saying problem, but there is this general sense that numbers already show that most of the Americans, it doesn't matter what race or ethnicity you are, there is this sense of trust towards the police force or the army force. It's not that this sense of protection has been lost over time. They still know how they rely into protective forces, but what has changed is that their actions and their interactions between minorities and, let's say, the non-traditional Republican stereotype that um, may support police militarization or police forces, but has consequent negative effects on them because of how they um, interact or how they interpret society problems.
yeah, and I think to back that up, a poll done by Gallup.com said that whites were 60% more whites were trusting of police than non-whites. And I think that speaks to the presence of where these heavy police influenced areas are. They're in, smaller, more ethnically diverse communities, and you've got this threat to where it's typical to believe that people of color or different ethnicities, non-white, are often um, the offenders of crimes. They're the ones committing the crimes and creating a bad influence in communities. At least that's typical stereotype. And so you see in these areas where there are more people of color and more diversity, or maybe a suspended area of non-whites, this type of influence of the police doesn't help the community overall get along to say that I trust the police and I will call the police if I need them. Because you're not going to call the police if you think they're going to show up in a tank and bring 25 of their strongest guys with their guns pointed at you and throw grenades at you with tear gas.
So that's the thing. Is it really a social problem instead of a more methodical problem? Because if it is, then how would you address that situation? Would you be less intimidated if you had a more minorities being incorporated into police forces? For example, having more people of color within the system, would that be less threatening or less or more social acceptable to people? Or
I I mean, if the tactics are still the same and the police still carry the same mindset, I don't care. I don't think it matters if the diversity of the police are half white, half non-white. I think it all comes down to the systematic way that we train our police now and the job that they feel that they've been given rather than historically the job that police were created to have. So I think 50 years ago, if you were to have well, maybe not even 50 years ago, 20 or 30 years ago, if you were to have a more diverse police task force, then sure, 100%, I think it would make a difference. But now, even people of color being on a police where they're coming down in military uniforms with tanks and big weapons doesn't make a difference if the guy in the uniform is black or if he's not black, Hispanic or not Hispanic, you know?
Like, it comes down to basically the fact that people do not deal well with change anyway. So these dramatic changes that are taking place is what's causing, like, I think what Kadad is saying with the systematic thing, like, people are so used to having a certain way of viewing something, and now all these dramatic changes are coming because like, people are getting rifles to use and stuff like that. So I feel like that's where the systematic problem is at. If subtle changes were made over time, people would be more willing to get along and, like, deal with them. But the fact that everything's just happening at once is what's causing the problem.
but the
Well, I
same
think
with gun regulations, you haven't seen changes, practical changes by any administration so far that would tackle, for example, not only gun regulations, but also police militarization. You would still see a high number of machinery being distributed throughout the U.S., even by a Democrat president that rejects and denies such involvement for police forces. Like Obama previously said several times, and after, for example, the Ferguson event, where he would deny or reject this whole idea of having police forces highly militarized.
Yeah, I mean, he called for a ban on these armored weapons that they'd already received and these military style toys, if you want to call them, that they got. And he's trying to, I guess, reverse the 1033 program, which I'm not entirely sure would do any justice. Yeah, they're receiving these weapons and these tanks and stuff, but I mean, they're receiving old computers, cots, old blankets, things that a smaller, less funded police force would actually benefit from. So there's good and there's bad from the program, and I think that what Obama was trying to get at with the recall of that came at the height of all of this publicized police brutality, and it doesn't look good when they're wearing camouflage uniforms and riding on top of tanks and throwing tear gas. But it'll be interesting, I think, to see within the next few years the legislation that does come up with the change of a new president. I know we have Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton on the Democratic ticket who support Obama's ban on these type of weapons, and then I think Rand Paul on the Republican side does as well, and then you've got Donald Trump, kind of unfortunately the eyesore for the Republican Party, but also well received, saying that he would increase the militarization of police to not only fight the war on drugs, but to fight the war on gangs. Didn't necessarily knew that that existed, but that just shows you with the change of hands of office, just two type of extremes that could possibly take place.
It's not that the presidential candidates are not aware of the situation they are, and they know that that would change that could potentially change their votes outcome, but they haven't. That's I don't know. I might be wrong, but personally, I haven't seen any of them addressing explicitly the question. You would have Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton mentioning, and all of the Republican side referring to a criminal justice reform, but I haven't seen how they would address the whole gun and militarization issue.
Yeah, I think that they've brought it up as form of kind of rousing up voters and what, especially for Bernie Sanders, having a younger following, something that people that are already following him are passionate about. But I haven't seen any proposed legislation or even practical ideas of how that would happen, other than what Obama has already kind of initiated and they've stepped back and supported. Um, I know there are a few things I don't, as far as what individuals think could be done to kind of turn this around, and one of those is body cameras. You guys may have a different opinion, but I think that that's a good thing, but I don't know if it's necessarily practical, especially for this day and age, because you already have dash cams and you already have cameras in prisons, and sometimes they conveniently or inconveniently work or don't work. So it's an idea, but I don't know if it's one that's going to make it through to
Uh-huh.
practicality.
Yeah, I definitely think that's a good idea because I feel like it's like could be used as a sense of accountability for the people that are engaging in the activities with the military weapons and stuff like that, and make sure that they're using it to a good, like for good and not for bad and not for corrupt reasons. And I definitely agree. I agree that too with people who feel like that it's a good idea that they all wear one.
But then you come down to the
Do you think
problem
it's
of if the national government is the one that puts this into place, like, are they the ones that have to enforce it? Because then you have the states and then you have local governments that have their own police forces and you have the state troopers and all
yeah?
that. You have to kind
And
of coincide with everyone.
and I think that would be interesting to see whether it's backed by everyone or if there's an increased support by Democrats or a decrease of support by Republicans. You know, like you brought up that it'd be a federal mandate, and we know Republicans are more for a smaller government and less government control. And so I guess it would be interesting to see if it is backed or if it will be backed. I know other options or other things people have brought up are something like having community review boards where the community in which these police are involved in like these brutality type things, they're held accountable. They don't get to get out of um, a trial or being convicted just because they're a police. And so the community kind of holds them accountable. I think to me that's a little more practical maybe than body cameras at this point. But
A number of people who've been talking about body cameras have been asking the question whether or not the average citizen should actually be concerned about being videotaped, and the possibility that maybe the average citizen will be videotaped and have that information leaked to some website or a freedom of information request results in those videotapes being posted on YouTube videos over the objections of citizens. Do you think we should be more concerned about our loss of privacy or more concerned about the problem of police militarization and brutality?
I mean, if I'm not doing anything wrong, I would much rather the cameras be going in case someone else is caught doing something wrong and I'm violated and then I'm in the position at the court of law, then I need proof that this happened. Just as a typical citizen, I think that would be my mindset. Others
Yeah,
may
exactly.
disagree.
Exactly. I feel like we should throw like if as long as justice is being upheld and society is being ran the way it's supposed to be. I don't care if I get on tape as long as I'm not going to be out there doing something that I feel like is illegal. And if I am, then so what? I deserve to be outed in that sense.
I don't know. I feel relatively biased to say that there is this rising concern that I suspect that is coming fast-paced to the American society, where they would focus more on how they're addressing domestic issues. And so for that, the whole idea of privacy and having highly militarized both concerns being major concerns for the general population, and the two of them threatening most of their what they believe their core, the whole idea of core democratic security and liberty means would
Well,
mean to.
I guess that would kind of fall back on whether you perceive the Constitution as protecting your right to privacy or whether it doesn't. I think that would probably come into play more so than the emotions of the everyday citizen.
And how would the response from society be like? If you have this constant increase of invasion of privacy and a more a empowered police force, what would happen? Would you see society being more leaning towards a more, okay, let's equalize, not by bringing them down, but bringing us up to the same level as them, and then um, appropriating some of their rights to us and being highly militarized, or using weapons the same level against them? That could be a potential scenario in future years as well.
So just real quick, we're down to the final minutes of the broadcast. Sort of going around the table, if you had to choose, if you were a policymaker and you're in the position where you could pursue one of two courses of action, which course of action do you think is the best way forward for the question of militarization? Is it on the one hand to demilitarize the police, take away the equipment and take away the powers that they were granted, or on the other hand, is it to find some way of empowering society, of monitoring the police, letting them keep the equipment and making sure that when they use it, the use is justified? Which way do you think you should go?
This whole empowerment idea that's my view, that would probably generate a race for power where they would try to achieve or justifications for their means. So I'm on the side that would see demilitarization more the response that it's needed right now. But
Ms. Farrell, what do you think?
I think it needs, like, it would, police militarization, if we keep going that way, because it will be hard to really be able to go away from it. We need to be able to monitor it, be able to have the control over the police, really, of what they can and cannot do, especially with this new equipment. Like, really, you don't need to have a tank and just driving through town with it if it's only going and doing a search warrant. You don't need all that heavy firepower to go to do the small things that in the past we've been able to do without so many people and so many high-powered weapons. So I think we just need to be able to control and monitor the use of the weapons that they have, but be able to use them if need ever arises that they do have to use them.
Ms. Dowles?
As a citizen, my view of the police is to keep the peace and to protect my constitutional rights, and I don't think that you need military equipment to do that, but I think that there needs to be a shift to demilitarize the police, and it starts with how we train them. It starts with the view that the community has of the police, and I think that the only way that you can do that is to create a positive presence and to say, this is why we're here, and it's to protect the peace and to protect your rights and for no other reason. And I think that you do that when the presence in the community is one of peace and is one not of a military presence.
And Mr. Pennington, it looks like you get the last word.
I feel like I agree with Sarah in the fact that we're not going away from it. Police militarization is going to be relevant for the rest of our life and beyond. And I feel like what we need to do, we just need to make sure we implement the proper training, and we are implementing ways to hold the people accountable, because there's no way that we're going to move away from it now. We might as well live with reality and do what we can and work with the best.
Well, it looks like that's the final word on this week's topic. Thanks to everybody at home who watched, or to everyone who might catch us on the later rebroadcast via YouTube. And I ask all of you to join us again next week at Thursday at 1 p.m. for another exciting and stimulating conversation on current events. Thank you again from the CU Senior Seminar Political Science class, and we appreciate it. Have a good day.